Joining us now is Veena Sikri, is a former High Commissioner to Bangladesh from New Delhi. Ambassador Sikri, thank you very much for making time for us, and welcome to WION The World is One. Bangladesh is literally on the brink as we speak. These students, which have become a mass movement, are threatening the future of the country. Most are demanding the Prime Minister to resign, besides her calling for dialogue. What could happen if the protests are not quelled at the moment, or the students' grievances are not met?
I think first we have to look at it in two parts. This began as a quota reform movement where, as you have correctly explained, the 30% quota that was reserved for children of freedom fighters, the quota reform movement was against that. But we have to remember 2 points here. Firstly, that in 2018, when Sheikh Hasina was still the Prime Minister, at that time the quota reform movement had started. And in response to that, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government had themselves abolished the quota. So for 6 years, there has been absolutely no quota in Bangladesh for admission to public services or public sector undertaking. Now, in June of this year, somebody went in appeal against that decision of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and the High Court reversed her decision. But her government, Sheikh Hasina's government, again went in appeal to the Supreme Court and said, we want to maintain our earlier decision that there will be no quotas at all. So the point is that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and the students have been on the same page all along. They have shared an identity. She has given full respect to the students for their demands. Only in the month of July, on around 15th of July, that is when the problem started, because soon after a press conference that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had given on return from her visit to China, in response to a question, she said, yes, the quotas had been given for children of freedom fighters and they deserved it at that time. The Razakars will not. Razakars' children will not get that quota. Razakars are a term symbolic of those who oppose the liberation war, who were supporting Pakistan in the liberation war. So that was taken up by the students as they had been called Razakars, and some violence broke out. The Bangladesh Awami League came into the violence. The Shibir, the Jamaat-e-Islami students wing, they came into the violence. There was huge clashes. A lot of students lost their lives. And the students were very upset. Naturally, it is quite understandable that students have lost their lives. And in a week of violence, about 200 students and policemen and other civilians lost their lives. In fact, in a newspaper report in Dhaka this morning, the figure given was that out of these 204 who have died, 53 were students, and the rest were either policemen or civilians or other people. So I think this is what the students were wanting, a judicial inquiry. But the demands of the students for the quota reform movement were met completely when the Supreme Court gave its judgment on the 21st of July and accepted whatever they wanted. Now there will only be a 5% quota for children of freedom fighters and a 2% additional quota for other minorities, and that's it. So that is, in that sense, the students have got their demands, but now it is beyond that. They are looking at, wanting a judicial inquiry has been announced by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, but the demand is now that she must step down.
All right. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, Madam Ambassador, because we've seen in recent protests all around the world, even in Africa, even in Europe, even in America, when these protests happen, they usually call for the government to resign, most probably the Prime Minister, most probably the President, in this case, the Prime Minister. So if the Prime Minister does resign, then what?
Well, at the moment, what has happened is that in response to this demand for the Prime Minister to resign, followed up by a 15-point demand of complete non-cooperation with the government, that is no payment of taxes, etc. Yesterday and today, there have been high-level meetings by the armed forces in Bangladesh. And in the meeting yesterday, the announcement by the armed forces was that we will stand with the people of Bangladesh and with the state. And today there was a National Security Council meeting, as you have yourself mentioned. And after that, they agreed, all these agencies, the armed forces, intelligence agencies and others, have agreed that this movement seems to have morphed into something else, and they decided that the people who are there are not all the students. The students' demands are being met, and those who are causing mayhem are actually going to be called as terrorists. Throughout the day today, people have died, policemen have died, the protesters have died. You cannot even call them students anymore, they're now protesters. And The next 3 days will give us an answer to the question you have asked, because there is a complete lockdown now. The curfew has begun as of 6 o'clock this evening, and there will the advisory is that nobody should come out on the streets for the next 3 days. I suppose that this has been done in response to a demand by the protesters that they would do a march onto Dhaka, onto the capital city of Dhaka. So we have to watch for the next 3 days to see how it will pan out, and what will happen, and what will the students do, the protesters, what will they do? I think that you are right. There are very often there's a dissatisfaction with the government. But I think the purpose, the main idea of a democracy, a constitutional democracy, is to have a peaceful change of government through elections or any other means. Now we have seen some of the people are coming out asking for constitutional changes, saying we are going to have this government and that government. All kinds of demands are there, which many are also calling a bit anarchic, because they don't know what will happen. You ask the Prime Minister to step down, what happens after that? What do the armed forces do?
Madam Ambassador, sorry to cut you short, but we are out of time now. Thank you very much for talking to us today. Those are very powerful insights that you've given us on WION World is One. I've been talking to Ambassador Veena Sikri, who's a former High Commissioner to Bangladesh from New Delhi. Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.